Greetings, brothers and sisters. I've been waiting to make this for a couple of days. My wife and I rewatched the Leave It All Behind movie with my wife, and I had more thoughts about that. But it's really about this video is about adjusting to an apocalyptic situation. Apocalyptic situation. I have one comment I want to address where somebody's talking about adjusting to this type of thing. And this isn't about prepper stuff. There's people who are better preppers than I am. People who have better prepper channels, these kind of things. Or even homesteading or any of these things. It's more about how you cope, like how you get through the first couple of weeks, first couple of months, right? Setting yourself up for the possibility for success in the future and adjusting to your new reality. So it's, I think, pretty close to 100 million views that the Netflix movie got, which, I don't know how many people watched it to the end, but you have a lot of people watching something that's watching people, and it's not the best movie, and it has, issues and things. But you have a lot of people watching this, and being in that, that experience of realizing that the system you're 100% dependent on has collapsed. Today is Thursday, December 21st, the shortest day of the year. This is the winter solstice. And this is Trump just was denied the ability to be on the ballot in Colorado, which I'll address tomorrow. Things like that are going on, right? There's always something going on. Of course, the conflict with Palestine and Israel, all these things. But people are more and more aware of, and you can talk to most people now, and you couldn't do this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was easy. It's been easier and easier to talk to people about this, about the possibility of a collapsing society. This Netflix is their number one movie, maybe their number one movie of the year. And people are thinking about it, right? People going into that experience and having, this idea put into them, or this idea that's already in them, that this society could collapse. The system they're 100% dependent on can collapse. But even if that doesn't happen, people go through personal apocalypse. And this can happen with a loved one dying, or any number of things, losing a job. People who are making $200,000-300,000 a year one day, and then 6 months later they're homeless, right? They lose their job, and no one wants to hire them, and they're no longer financially viable, or whatever it is. They're no longer worth anything to the employment market. So what I'm about to explain here can be transferred to any of those types of things whenever you're going through something like this. At some point in your life, you see this with elderly couples. One of the two people, people have been married 50 years. One of the two of them dies, and the other one dies 6 weeks later, a couple weeks later, because they just, they don't want to be here anymore. That's the majority of people are going to go through that when the apocalypse kicks in. And so, in terms of a knockout blow, where like the power grid goes down, and again, I'm not saying these things are going to happen. They're going to happen eventually. It might be 1,000 years from now. I don't know, but it doesn't look like it's going to be then, right? But when we're talking about this, right, what I'm talking about here is something where you realize your lifestyle is out of stock. Your lifestyle is not coming back. That your lifestyle is over. And I've said this before. There's three major things that can happen in a society like this. A system like this. The power grid goes down, which wipes out the food system and the monetary system. The monetary system goes down, and then that wipes out the food system and the power system and the whole system. Or the food system goes down, and then people run the streets, and havoc and chaos ensues, and then everything collapses that way. These are the things that we're looking at. And there could be a war. There's different ways that these things could happen. EMP, solar flare, some kind of big event. And we see that these events have been portrayed in movies, these things that happen, right? Some sort of a AI takeover where they collapse the the economic system or the whatever it is, right? Hackers. I mean, there's all these ways that these things can happen. And we know from past experiences it just takes a short period of time for people to panic, and that there have been warnings, right, about this, multiple warnings. And the warnings haven't been, knockout blows, but they have hinted at things that could happen in the future or will happen in the future. There's a scene in the movie where the girl tells a story from the West Wing, and my wife was like, "Oh, that's your story. It's not my story. I've heard it from Master Chargy and the Sizemore system, that there is a person in a river who's drowning. And somebody comes up to the side of the river and says, 'I'll throw you a rope.' And the person says, 'No, I'm waiting for God to help me.'" Some devotee, right? Some person who was really, a God worshiper, right? And then a boat comes by and says, "Hey, I'll get you out of the river." And he says, "No, I'm waiting for God to rescue me." And then a helicopter comes and says, "I'll come get you out of the river." And the guy says, "No, I'm waiting for God to rescue me." And so the guy eventually dies, goes to heaven. He said, "God, I was praying and you didn't rescue me." And he said, "What do you mean? I sent you a guy with a rope, I sent you a boat, and I sent you a helicopter. And you refused to get in." So, that's the story the girl tells in the movie, right? But what I'm talking about here isn't so much of a rescue as being prepared for what's going to happen. Because the divine system, people want to, blame the controllers, and you got to stop doing that. If you're a controller based, blaming the elite. Oh, it's elite. We got to catch the elite. Oh, the elite, all these things. The elite are keeping this dysfunctional system going. They are the gatekeepers of the system. And the system, as unfair as it is to people, as demonic as it is, we're 100% dependent on. It's their system. And people think, oh, they're trying to destroy the system. Why would they destroy a system where they held all the power? Why would they do that? The system is not sustainable. And so they're trying to find a way to preserve their power and, whatever elements of the system that will support and be, something that can move forward into the future. That's what they're trying to do. But they're not really in charge, right? They can keep the system going the way it is, but the system can't be partially, retained, not for long. The system itself, the whole system has to collapse. It's divine providence, right? It's part of a divine plan. And I talked about this before in maybe my last video about this, that people are the biggest indicators. How poorly functioning, how low functioning people are. How, reverse from being, how limited people are in terms of their full potential and being disconnected from God and the natural world and, everything that the system has created. And, people have created the system and the system has created the people. So it's a joint depravity, but it's still, the outcome is the same. And most people realize something has to change, but what has to change for them is the other people. It's like a dysfunctional marriage where you're like, if my wife would just do this or my husband would just do this. And the marriage is going to end in divorce because neither party and both people are not willing to change themselves. And that's what's necessary. Everyone can talk about how everyone else needs to change, but people know there needs to be change, right? It's just that they don't want the things that they want in their lives to change. They don't want to do the changing themselves. And so that's, another big part of the problem. But we all recognize change is essential, that there has to be something that changes pretty dramatically because we can't go on the way we're living right now. And young people are the biggest, the biggest indicator of that. Like each generation getting worse. And we know that these young people are just, they can't do anything. They're helpless. They're not even living lives, any kind of in the real world lives, right? We see what's happening. We know this can't get any worse or, it's got to stop, right? And in that, there is a big population reduction that needs to happen. And everyone kind of knows it, and no one really wants to admit to it. No one wants to think about it. Certainly, we don't want the people controlling the system to make those decisions for us. And so, no one wants to be a part of the people that get culled, right? No one was volunteering. I mean, some people would volunteer for it. But no one wants to, everyone has at least some survival instincts and self-preservation inside themselves. And with everything being the way it is now, it isn't, really there for people to to think about that. But when you have that first shock, now many of us experienced a shock like this in the big event in 2001. Those of us who were conscious then, but there's been other things that have happened, since then, obviously with COVID. What we saw with COVID, which I'll get into in a bit. Some of these other things, these were warning signs, right? What's happened with, all these different sort of events, and some of them have changed us. There was that hacked refinery. You guys remember that? It wasn't that long ago. My wife and I were traveling, or we had to travel, and we had to buy something for our car, and we were going to put a bunch of gas cans in the back of the car, which is, not, in the, we were going to, like, outside the car, which isn't really desirable, right? But we didn't know if we were going to be able to make it to our destination because where we were traveling through, there were gas shortages. And there were gas stations that were closed on the way. We found one that was open. There were a lot of, that were open, but this was, there were states where they didn't have gas. And there was a guy in front of me who was filling trash bags, like those thin, clear trash bags, not doubled up, not like two or three of them, but one. One layer, and he had, was loading these into the trunk of his car, bags full of gas, right? So we know what happens with people, and there's been these warnings. We see them quite often, these movies, things like this, where we kind of get in touch with the idea. I mean, I would say the good thing about this movie is it captured the complete helplessness of these people to deal with the situation they were now thrust into, right? This moment where they realized, oh, the system's collapsed. Like this one guy saying at the end of the movie that he's a worthless person, an unprepared person. He can't do anything. He's helpless, right? He can't live without GPS, can't drive anywhere, can't do anything. And so there's the initial shock that a big event has just happened, some sort of an upheaval. And it might not initially be a knockout blow. At least it won't be clear to people. And it might not be one, but it'll be, a variety of ones, a death by 1,000 cuts. And you'll lose something. Like, people have this in their personal lives. Somebody dies in your life, somebody that's important to you. And it's a hole, like there's a hole in your life now. Or you get fired, or something happens where there was something that you were doing that you no longer have the ability to do. Person to spend time with, whatever it was, right? There's something missing in your life, and you have to cope with that. And it's a loss, and you go through the 5 stages of grief, and you have to summon up, some energy to keep on going on. You have this with kids who, there'll be multiple suicides in a high school and things like this, right? Like people, just they lose the will to go on, right? And so when that happens, when people realize that their lifestyle has changed forever and the system that they're 100% dependent on, you'll find that most people are just going to quit and check out. But they're not going to commit suicide. They're not going to just give up like that, with that much consciousness. They're going to go unconscious. You might talk to one of your loved ones or one of your family members or friends, and they'll be sort of catatonic, and you can't make contact with them. Like they're just not there. It's like their soul's already left, is preparing to leave their bodies, and they're just hanging on because that's, they're not ready to die. That's the other thing, right? People aren't prepared to die, and I'll get into that in just a bit. But they're also not prepared to live. And so there are people who, aren't necessarily going to commit suicide, but they're going to give up. And it might be upwards of 80% of people that are just going to, or behave in a self-destructive way. They'll flip out. They'll get so emotional. They'll get so freaked out. They'll be, doing crazy risk-taking things, and just, they'll put themselves in a position where they'll get, they'll be removed from whatever's going on. A lot of people just die right off the bat if there's some sort of, destructive bombs or whatever, war things, whatever it might be. And you kind of can start seeing those people now. You'll see them, NPC type people who you can see that they're not going to make it. Like right now, you can tell they don't have what it takes. Maybe a few of them will, they'll get the slap of reality and they'll wake up. And there might be some people like that. People that you were like, oh, I would never thought you would have made it, and they're highly functioning in a post-apocalyptic situation. And when the apocalypse happens, they're going to be looking for people to leech off of. They're unprepared. They are scared of dying. They have almost nothing to offer. Like these. There's a great scene at the end of the spoiler alert at the end of the show, where there's a prepper-like guy played by Kevin Bacon, and he comes off a little bit selfish, but he's not being selfish at all. And he's confronted with these two people who have never really done anything in terms of prepping, and one of them's son is going to die. There's no, he's dead. If you understand what's being said about it, there's they're being hit by energy weapons, and the kid's lost all his teeth or whatever it is, right? And there's no way that kid's surviving. And they want help, right? They're desperate. And they're coming for handouts. People who didn't, maybe mocked people like this, whatever it is. And then they're coming to your house looking for handouts, right? And, you might feel bad about these people and you feel some compassion for them, but they are not worthy of being invested in. I mean, for the most part. I'm not saying there's some blanket statement. You have to judge each situation as it comes. But most of these people are just going to leech off of you until they die. They're not. They're already, they've already made their decision, right? There's lots of people who are marked for extinction, and they've chose this for themselves. They have no part in the plan. They have no part in the, redemption. They have no part in building this back. They have nothing to contribute. And they're just, walking zombies, walking ghouls. And they're, investing in them and wasting resources on them, is a mistake. And, you have to evaluate. Everyone has to go through these things themselves because it's, kind of cold-blooded. But it's the reality of the situation. These people had the opportunity to prepare because there's been multiple warnings. And people watch this movie and people are listening to these videos and aren't doing anything. Many of you guys aren't doing anything, even preparing internally. And this is what this video is about, is preparing internally. And so when that first event happens, there's a variety of just essential life, things to do with your, survival that I'll go through, just basic things. But mostly what I want to talk about is what you do internally to cope with something like this, right? I got a comment from somebody. Let me see if I can find that comment here. I definitely can find it. Here it is. So the person wrote, "Hi, Paul, I am..." Here, let me just make this bigger here. "Hi, Paul. For the last years, I've been thinking about what you said in this video, knowing and feeling it's coming." This is my original video about this. "But hearing it spoken openly from you has freaked me out a bit. I don't want to die. I'm scared to die. It's worrying. What will happen to my son, my dog? These concerns, I don't believe in God, although I do believe that there is something cosmic, a higher energy, a body, a host, an internal soul. I planted 3 pines from a pot thinking they were shrubs. 17 years later, so they are taller than my house. They're beautiful pines. I'm still looking at them. Everything thinking about what you said, I started thinking, how can everything I grew benefit us? Thinking about wood for fire, my deck wood for fire. My facial expression must have changed because I noticed my dog was sitting watching and started fretting. A reflection of my emotions, perhaps a friend of mine some years ago is an ex-soldier, but never out of the army. We always talked about this topic over the years. He told me, do 3 things: build a garden, get a dog, and learn how to shoot. Sorry, this is way too long a comment, but thanks for the video. It got me thinking again." So just to go over those things, like those 3 things that he pointed out. And the first thing to know is there's an initial shock. And there's different times you've probably gone through that shock. You get a diagnosis, you have cancer, or somebody dies. You hear that somebody, loved one has died. Or the big event, 2001. Or, what happened with COVID, right? When you hear there's a pandemic and everyone's worried about they're going to get sick and die, right? There's that initial shock. And, what do you do to deal with that? Because that's the most important part. That you're now in a state where everything has changed and you're triggered, you're spiraling, you're in a fear-based situation. The meditation, the gratefulness meditation I do is essential for something like this. being able to settle in and just go into a reflective state. But to do that, on a physical level, there are certain things you need, right? So if you understand, like, it takes about a week to adjust to something. If you start a new job, you'll go in there and there'll be a lingo, that people have at work, and there'll be these little cliques of people. There'll be all this stuff, and you're kind of like an outsider. But it takes about a week, depending on the situation, to adjust to something. A new job, a new situation, these things in terms of Stockholm Syndrome and the Stanford experiment, these things where, psychological experiments where people, or the Stockholm Syndrome and stuff that happened with Patty Hearst. It takes about a week or so before you start identifying with your kidnappers, your fellow employees, whatever it might be, right? And maybe 2 weeks, to 3 months to adjust to a new situation, going through the various stages of grief. So initially, there needs to be some things that you need to adjust, right? The Mormons have, like, each person is supposed to have 3 months of food stored in their house. And I think that's a good idea, to have at least, if you can have food for a year, maybe not, all the food you need. But it takes a while to adjust to growing food and doing things in a way where you're living off the land, and it takes a while to build all these skills. But those initial weeks where you have some period of time to where you can, be in your house, you don't have to go out and be, fending off, fighting people for resources. Remember that, we learned a lesson from COVID. How many of you went to a grocery store and found out that it had been cleaned out, right? And so my wife and I went to the bank, and they didn't have any cash left. So that was a telling sign, right? There was already a run on the banks, so we know that's going to happen. Just from COVID alone, right? Just the whole COVID panic. All the toilet paper, people went out and bought toilet paper right off the bat. Now, they had years to go and buy and stock up toilet paper, like if that was their big concern. And you had years and years to go to Costco and stock up on all these things. But if you watch or you go to a grocery store and you see the amount of deliveries, or you've worked at a store like that, you see the amount of deliveries they have on a daily basis to restock what they have inside. It takes about a week and all the food is gone, right? And if all the fast food restaurants are closed, which they will be, all the restaurants are closed, and all the food has disappeared, and people are looting the grocery stores, everything gets stripped clean, and there's no food left. A lot of these people are going to die, but they're going to consume, they're going to go and loot and be a part of that whole thing. And they're going to eat up what's, left over from the system, right? And there's going to be nothing left. But, you can start storing things, canned goods and dried foods and whatever it is, right? Pasta, anything that you can have so that you have enough calories to where you're not immediately facing starvation. So we're looking at, what are the things you need to survive? Well, obviously oxygen, you need to be able to breathe. You need to be able to have fresh air, and that might be something that's compromised, right? If something like that's compromised, then it's really, most people are just, you're not going to have the ability to deal with that, right? It's hard. You can get a gas mask, but you're going to wear that 24/7. There's that. People have bunkers, and, people have money, things like that. They can maybe have some air filtration system, and you're going to be stuck in a bunker indoors for whatever, nuclear fallout. There's things like that. It's not really worth it because you're going to die. You're going to come out and there's going to be a scorched earth, apocalyptic situation where you no longer can grow food because there's radioactive particles in the soil. All these things. There's some things that are just, there's no fixing. There's no, if you live in one of those areas, you're done. Whatever it might be. But you need oxygen, you need air, and like I said, but water, you can do something about water. The other things are body temperature issues, right? Because if you're in an emotional shocked state and it's too cold in your house or it's too hot, that adds to the issue, right? Where it becomes something where you're already panicked and now your body is having temperature issues, right? This is your, you can suffer hyperthermia or whatever it might be. Various levels of your body shutting down because of the climate. And that's going to be a big thing. If your electricity goes off, no water, no way to cook your food. So if you have food, how do you cook it, right? How do you manage? Like, you have some way of cooking food if the immediate things around you break down, right? Like, it's a good idea if you're into this thing and you want to survive and you're aware of this. We used to do fire drills and things in our schools, and my family and I once, for a couple of weekends, we shut off the electricity at our house for the whole weekend. And we had these things. One of my viewers sent this way to, you can make your homemade oil lamps with just like a cleared glass or something, and you put any kind of cooking oil, and it's just little metal. There's a little metal thing. I made a video on it. So much, obviously not here now, but you bend the metal into the way that holds the wick, and there's a little handle on it. And you can pull the wick out of the oil, and it's a way to light your house, right? There's things that we did, to storing water and having 5 gallon fulls of water and things. And so that's, you have water and you have food and you have a way to cook it and you have a way of keeping warm or keeping cool, and you have these various things, right? The other thing is, what do you do with your waste? Garbage is one thing, but human waste is another, because your poop will kill you. And if you don't have a way to get rid of it. And our system now is to use fresh drinking water, clean water, that has real value, and flush it down into a sewer or a septic tank or something. But the electricity goes off and you don't have water running into your house, and you're in an apartment or some kind of situation like that. I mean, it's really hard to survive in an apartment because of your neighbors panicking and all these things, right? I mean, that's a whole, defending yourself, all these things become an issue. But, what do you do? Like, you need some sort of composting toilet. You need some sort of new system to deal with your human waste. Because, you can use it in a humanure type situation, but, it has, it has to sit for like over a year and compost to be, something you could grow food in, because, of the bacteria and all these things. There's things in your waste that will kill you or kill other people, right? That's why your city government pays all this money. You pay taxes to have your waste dealt with, right? These sanitation departments or whatever it is. And so those are the things that you need to deal with right away. What do you deal with your human waste? Where do you get your water? Where do you get your food? And being able to, adjust to these things and, have that time where you're not worried about those essential things, where you're not immediately put in a survival panicked mode because you don't have what it takes to, you don't have enough food. Like, most people have less than a day's food in their house, right? You guys remember from my time in the Chennai flood. I was in India when there was flooding, and we had, within an hour, 3 feet of water in our apartment, and 4/5 of the city of 26 million people was flooded. And we had some nice neighbors, and they had, food storage, and I had food stored, and it had rained a week before, and I took it as a warning, and I gave all my kids money. We had to walk to these like small grocery stores, and I said, stock up on water and food. Go out, all of them go to the grocery store at least once, because we had to walk back with bags full of stuff, and we could only carry so much. And I said, when you get a chance, go out and get things, and we all stocked up on things. And so we had enough food, and we had, we had enough water, but water was a concern. And there was a beautiful house, the nicest house on the street. It would be a $1 million home, depending on what neighborhood it was in America. But, rich people lived in this house. And they had lots of servants who were either with them or had left or whatever, were home when the flood hit. And they had no food. And my neighbor threw, chapatis, so tortillas, basically, same thing, over to them, like these day-old stale chapatis in a bag. Like, there was water between the two houses, and they had already run out of food. They didn't have a day's worth of food in their house. And because they had servants, they were pretty much helpless. I mean, I'm sure the woman of the house knew how to cook, but they didn't have enough food to even last a day. They were already hitting starvation in the first day, right? And so, how are they going to make it? Like, if you don't even have a day's worth of food in your house, right? How are you going to survive any of these things? So there needs to be a time, and this is what I'm describing here, where you realize you're freaked out, something's just happened and you're in a state of shock and you're triggered and you don't know what to do. And you need to get through that period of time. You can't let that get worse than it is, right? The initial shock is what it is. And there might be subsequent shocks, but you need time to adapt, at least a good week, to acclimate to your new reality. And to do that, you need to have some of these things in place, right? If you're not putting these things in place, then you're choosing to be in a situation where you're, going to be reactive and you're just going to be erased from the board, right? Because then you're going to have to go out with the looters and the rest of the people. And, at the end of this movie, there's, their reality when they realize what's happened in the city. They're in Long Island looking at New York City and bombs are going off and they can hear gunshots and things like this, gunfire. And that's where people are just flipped out and they're in a state of panic and they're just, going out and killing people or doing whatever they're doing, fighting, whatever it might be. And it's just chaos, right? And like, you can't be in that. Like, that's just, the initial shock that all these people, before everything settles down and people realize, okay, we have to, keep some sense of, decorum and, we have to have some kind of civilized reaction to what's going on. We can't be in a panicked mood, panic mode and just be, reactive. And so it takes, at least a week to acclimate to your new reality and having a good 3 months where you're, all right, I have enough to survive here in my place where I don't have to go somewhere. I don't have to go to some FEMA camp, especially as you get older. Like when young people, they react to war so much better. Young people are able to survive and adjust to death of a loved one much quicker than older people, right? The older you get, the harder it is for you to lose any of these types of things and be out of your routine. Like my wife and I were talking about possibly getting, bug out bags. But I'm like, if we have to leave our house, I'm screwed. Like, you're screwed. Like, I'm just, I'm not sleeping on the floor or the ground. I mean, I can't camp out like I used to in these things, right? I mean, I just don't have the ability. Like, it's, if that's the case, then, I mean, I just, physically, I'm just not up for it, right? Like, if it comes to that, I'm not going to some FEMA camp or whatever. It's just, and they're not for us, right? They're for young people. They can, they can reprogram the young people and, get them to accept these things. But old people are, basically worthless and have a hard time adjusting. The older generation isn't going to give up their lifestyle that easily. And so most older people are just going to give up. Like, they're just going to check out. It's just going to take them how much before they're like, all right, I'm tapping out, right? I mean, most people are going to tap out because of that, if it's depending on the severity of the situation. But the way you can avoid that is to have some sort of preparation for, the initial shock and initially what's going on. And what you're doing is giving yourself a chance to adapt and see if, this is something you want to pursue, right? So this is one of the more important points. Having this idea that it isn't bad is really essential. You enter into a wait and see type period, right? All right, what is this going to be like? Maybe this isn't as bad as I thought, right? When I got ostracized from, Heartfulness, I knew that Dodgy had turned on me and then, everybody else in the organization, I was bugged by it for a couple of days. And I realized, hey, I didn't like these MNF. I didn't like most of these MNFers anyway. I mean, there's great people, saintly people, but I wasn't really close to those people anyways. And I didn't really like and get along with or really, I wasn't like a lot of the people that were in the organization. And I'm like, I didn't lose anything. Like, what, they have a negative opinion of me, right? This really helped me here in this, on this YouTube channel. That I can speak freely, and I know people are going to be upset at me or not like what I have to say, and they'll lash out and they'll do their thing, they'll be butthurt. And being able to not care about that has been really essential. And so that, is where that started. I used to care about what people think, and now I don't, right? And, what I was going through, if someone said this is going to happen to you, it would have seemed really bad. But when it actually happened, it wasn't bad at all, right? I mean, when I was concerned about being in a divorce situation and not having somebody to help me with, with the kids and the family, but my ex was such a disaster. You guys who listen to my Journey series, that I was, so much better off without her. What seemed like a disaster was actually a blessing. Like those are just two examples of big changes that have happened to me, things, and they were all happening at the same time that I realized were a blessing in so many different ways. And so, looking at the apocalypse as something bad, you don't know what it is yet. And you might be a person who is like brought to life in a post-apocalyptic situation, because when the electrical grid goes down, there's no more Wi-Fi and these things. There's a sigh of relief that everybody's nervous systems, everybody's subtle bodies. I mean, so many different ways. These poisons and the 5G and the all these different, the Bluetooth, all these things bouncing around, all these electromagnetic waves, the electricity itself in your house, all these things. That when you get away from that, there's a piece to it, right? And you might find out that you're thriving and happier than you ever were before. Some people will thrive in the apocalypse, in a post-apocalyptic situation. And that's just the way it is. And you might be one of those people. You don't know. You might be chosen for this. But if you don't give yourself the opportunity by getting negative, by panicking, by not being prepared, you'll never know. You'll never find out that you were actually somebody that could have thrived in a post-apocalyptic situation, that you love growing food and you love this new lifestyle, right? So I'm switching to a picture of tinctures my wife has made. One of them's, I think it's called Firewater, and has all these things in it. And it's something that you take. It's like a tonic. It has vinegar in it, and it's a natural tonic you take to boost your immune system and other things. And another one is goldenrod, which we have a lot growing here. And goldenrod's supposed to be important against the spike protein. It's one of the things that takes out the spike protein, and we have a field of it, a huge field of it growing. My wife has been making these tinctures. Before we got together, she had been a part of a community garden and had gotten chickens. So she was already, doing these things a little bit on her own. And then when we got together, we, were building a homestead, and, we had the cows, and, she started to do things, and she really loves doing it. Like she prefers doing that to, her normal work or whatever it is, right? She really loves growing food. She's good at it. And she likes doing these tinctures, and she's developed all these skills that weren't there beforehand. And she and I went for a walk, early on when we were together, and I was talking about how the apocalypse is inevitable, the collapse, and she couldn't believe it. Like she couldn't accept that as being a reality. Like her, there's, it wasn't like a disagreement, like whatever. Everyone doesn't matter whether you can accept it or not, right? But now it's much easier for her to accept because she has raised her skill level, and, she's aware that she really likes doing this other work, right? Primary labor. She really enjoys doing it. She, is good at it. Of course, we're physically older, and there's much more satisfying in different ways. And I've built a number of homesteads now, and my skill level has risen over time, and I really enjoy doing that, right? And, I look forward to it, and, being outside, and there's a health to that, right? And we have all these ways and things that we're doing now that are a part of that. And all the things I talked about being, preparing for the food and and all those things are essential, and there's people that'll teach you how to do that. There's all these videos. There's information out there for those people who want to invest in this and figure out, and again, it's not to me time to quit your job and go all in. It's just because, you're thinking about this. It's spending a little time and energy preparing for something like this, right? And being aware that these things happen. Like even if it's just a temporary thing, you have to get through for a couple of weeks, for a month, before the system reboots or whatever. Just being able to cope and be aware and do some training and be comfortable. Like there's things that you can do in a post-apocalyptic situation, and apocalypse itself, and pre-apocalypse. There's things that you could do to prepare for all those things. And one of the things is connect to God internally through the meditation, the Gratefulness meditation, the Gratefulness meditation channel that's linked in all these, description boxes. It's free. It's self-explanatory. There's explanations and playlists, and it's comprehensive in how to do the Sajmark system. And what that's done for me and, can do for people is, my ability to intuit and connect with my heart and be shown something and be aware of it and say, oh, this is something that I'm being told, I'm being, prepared for. Before the big event 2001, my family and I, me particularly, I went through this thing where I was panicked for 2 weeks before the thing happened. And the day it happened, in the immediate aftermath, I was totally calm. Like I had been prepared, and everyone else was in the world was panicking. You have this situation now where 100 million people have watched this movie, and they went through a collective freak out about realizing that this could happen to them, right? Where now they're, it's right in their face, and they kind of feel like on a intuitive level that this is, something, right? The collective panic we went through when COVID hit. And, I wasn't panicked when these things happened because I experienced the panic and the condition like I could feel something coming weeks ahead of time. And of course, it wasn't a panic because nothing was happening, but I felt unsettled for a couple of weeks. And then when it was time to happen, I didn't feel, I was just, all right, my kids were prepared for these things through the homestead. And as much as my family was a failure, my kids got things out of it that, when the flood hit, there were people telling me how great my kids were doing and, how well we were functioning. And I said, yeah. In a week before the flood hit, we went to the movies and we had to stop in the road. We went to a movie. It got out at like 7. We went out and ate dinner there, and we were leaving about 7 p.m. So the movie started at like 3 or 4, and then we ate dinner at the mall. We used to do this. Like it was a way to kind of connect back with America. And, we were in India. This is when the flood hit. And we were driving back in a cab, and there was a road where the road turned into a river. They have a typhoon season where it just rains, like right before they grow their food. It's dry most of the time there. But they had, rain. We had rain for like 3 months. And eventually there was so much flooding and the dam was so full, they opened the floodgates in the dam. But before that, there was flooding. And I said to my kids, this is when I said, like, and the power went off, electricity went off. And I said, this is like a warning sign. We got a week and, we bought water and we prepared for what was about to happen. It was a sign. And of course it did happen, right? And being able to recognize those signs and take advantage of those things. I had, hemorrhoids, and my mom and dad both had them. It's a, hereditary thing. And I got an operation for it. It sucks, the whole thing. But I was looking for natural cures. And, now I'm so off of allopathic medicine, and allopathic medicine just doesn't really work for me. And, I'd done research on this before and didn't find anything. But maybe about 3 weeks ago or so, Dr. Bergs put out a video of this thing called stone root or Kalisia root. And, I never heard of it before. And it's good for, I have vascular issues. Like that's something where I get like some, I have just different things. People have different things in their physical system. And knowing your physical system and, where stress is relieved, where your weaknesses are. And there's vascular issues. And also things to do with my liver. Like I've, been working on detox and, fixing my, fatty liver and things. And it's been working. I've been having, success. And the Kalisia root, the stone root, which the Native Americans used, and I guess Benjamin Franklin had somebody that, was like the guy Kalisia was connected to him in some way. The root's named after, but it's really essential. And I found a video guy making the tinctures with it. It's a really hard stone root that comes in a bulb, and I was able to buy some on Etsy, and now we're going to plant it. And it's another tincture that we're going to make. And it has medicinal value, right? And so these things have come along, and, and I pay attention to them, right? I'm prepared for them, and I'm ready to go because I'm, like, taking them as signs. Like, I'm being instructed, oh, you need to, be aware of this. I mean, here's this thing that I could have used years ago, but it comes up all of a sudden, and I feel energy there, and I connect with it, and I'm like, all right, this is something and I find a way to grow it, right? And so in the future, we can make tinctures, and this will be part of our healthcare and these other things, right? There's things I've watched building food forests and, creating these things. We're doing something now to prepare for something in the future. There's another story that Master Chargy told, and this was to do with preparing for death. And most people aren't prepared for death, and they're not preparing for a post-apocalyptic situation, and so they're screwed. In both, these are the two options that they're going to have: death or survive the apocalypse, and they're prepared for neither. But the story is that there was this kingdom that had one corrupt king after another. And so what they would do is they would pick somebody to be king for a year, and the king would come in, and they would, after a year, they would take the king on the other side of the river, and he was banished from ever coming back to the kingdom. But they would have a year of being king, and most of the guys who became king would indulge. They would drink. They would, they would just party and do all the things, take advantage of the lavish royal lifestyle, and then they would be put in a boat and banished from the kingdom. But there was this one person decided that they would build a kingdom across the river. The guy built a kingdom on the other side of the river. And so when his year was up, he got into the boat. He didn't indulge. He didn't do any things the other kings did. He got on the other side of the river, and then he went to the kingdom, and he had a kingdom there, right? It's a metaphor for dying, right? Where you use your life, you're going to die. And so what are you doing to, in this part of your living experience to prepare for the other side? When you cross over the threshold of death, what are you doing to prepare for the other side? And people who are Christians say, I've accepted Jesus, and they think that's all they have to do, this thing. But there's things that you really need to do to prepare for death and set up your soul for success. And some of that takes sacrifice and, lack of indulgence and your egotistical pursuits, and your ego isn't going with you, right? Your ego isn't you. Your ego is something that's necessary for your survival here, but it's not who you are. And you can also use this as a metaphor for the apocalypse. Now, if there's going to be a collapse of some sort of another, and eventually there will be, then those people who are building pockets of the future, building something on the other side of the river for themselves, and they're taking skills, they're taking things, things that they can accumulate here on this side, tools, and all these things are available now. When Home Depot isn't open and you need shovels, and you're like, oh, I wish I'd got shovels when I had the opportunity. And you go there, and it's it's a looted store, right? And so the things that you need now, the tools you need, and the things you need internally, and being able to figure that out, because each person is going to be different depending on where you are and your particular situation, who you are as a person, and what your system, what your constitution, your internal constitution is, and being able to attune to that and do the things necessary, and have the things necessary that you're going to need specifically, right? Some people will be around radioactive fallout, so they're going to need a Geiger counter. Other people won't. No reason to have it if you don't need it, right? I mean, you could just say, I'm going to buy everything I need. Yeah, sure, if you have the money for it. And, but I mean, end up getting so much stuff you don't know where it is. And, I mean, you're in a situation where you get evacuated and you have all this stuff sitting in the house waiting for somebody else to use it, right? Because, you weren't attuning to your certain situation that you need to attune to. I mean, for some people living in the city, it's having a place to go, because cities are death traps. Like, suburbs, of course, better, but cities are a disaster. There's this guy, Joel Skousen, whatever, strategic relocation. He's got a whole thing there. And, he builds bunkers for people, and he has these places that he, if you heard it, you could look up interviews with him, and he's got books about this. And he documents the places around the country that are good places to go. They have certain things that make them survival centers. And places like L.A. and there's these one highway coming out of the city, and so they've seen this in the past when economies have collapsed in countries, and people flee the cities and they walk around the highway and they go 3 miles one way and 3 miles the other, and they devour everything in their path. Hordes of people, farms, and they're just turning into these mobs that are fleeing and scared, and they just going through the countryside eating whatever it is there they can take or whatever, right? And so like these things have to be assessed, and where you are, your location, all these things, and understanding it. And there's no reason to get overwhelmed. I should have said that at the beginning. Like this all doesn't have to be done tomorrow, but it's just having some kind of idea of what's going on. Like you're building a life in a post-apocalyptic situation where you have to have some skills and some survival items and systems. You need systems. Like the system is now delivers you water, deals with your waste, and keeps you warm or cold, and delivers you food. All these things. When the system collapses, and it no longer does that, well, then what are you going to do? What's your system going to be for each one of those things? What is a system for getting rid of your waste, your human waste? You have a big yard, you can just dig holes, right? Whatever it is. So you can make some sort of outhouse type situation. But what about your food? What about your water? What about these things, right? How are you going to, what are you going to get to have all these things, right? And so, the controllers want a certain amount of population to die. And God, a divine system, is working on depopulation. And so that's the initial net, right? They're going to try to scoop up as many people as possible and erase them off the board. And they want a lot of people just to give up and volunteer for that, and the chaos that ensues. So your first job is to escape the initial net, and then adjust to what's going on and see if it's something that you have any interest in making these wholesale changes to your lifestyle and doing something new. And not everyone will. I don't know if I will, right? It's depending on the circumstances. Your abilities are there, and when it's time for you to go, it's time for you to go, right? Your soul's ready for you to go. You can't fight that. And for a lot of people, they just they're not worried about this because they know that when the system collapses, they're going with it. That they don't have the ability, desire, and it's not a part of their destiny to be part of the future. These people are just going to go into some catatonic state, and they'll find some way to exit this world quickly after the apocalypse is upon us, or the initial stages beforehand. And going back to this comment where the woman said that she didn't believe in God, but believes in spirit or soul. That's essential to have some sort of spiritual connection, connecting to the divinity within you. And if your soul has something to offer, if you have something to offer, and your soul's, part of your soul's plan is to be a part of a post-apocalyptic situation, then the stuff that you need internally and circumstantially will be there. You'll find ways to survive the initial period, and then you can start building what needs to be there. Some sort of pocket of the future. That's what this channel is about, building some sort of pocket of the future that living the way now that people are all going to have to live in the future, and developing some of these skills and these just a different mindset and different orientation to life. The people who are farmers and homesteaders and lived in tribal situations and village-based situations. I talk about this so much that years and years ago, our ancestors were either forced or lured off their farms and out of their tribal situations and became what we are today, which is people who have a specialized skill and all their other needs are taken care of. And so people are, not able to go back to what we were before. And now we have to. And this, living with electricity, living with modern conveniences, living with these things is an anomaly. It's it's not something that exists, in other parts of the very recent history. I mean, there's always been some technological development. There's been civilizations here on planet Earth before, but they don't last, right? Whatever the time they do last, people still have to do these primary labor things afterwards. When the civilization collapses, the empire collapses, whatever technological advancement there is, whatever comforts there are, then they disappear. And, you're going to need some of these things. It's good to have some of them. The more that you can have, the less the shock it is to transition into something different, right? But being able to give yourself the time to do that is essential, that initial phase. And the only way you can do that is start preparing in some way internally more than anything else, and connecting to God and being able to be, flexible. The people who have survived are the ones who are the most spiritually and mentally flexible, right? People who are able to change and are working on themselves, changing all the time. Seeing that they need to change this or need to change that and doing the work necessary to change because it's better for them spiritually and because God and their soul wants them to change and do this. But people are just so rigid in their personalities and so hard and gross, and they don't have much flexibility, control freaks, whatever. They're not going to do well because they're going to lose control, and they're not able. They're not people that have shown a sense of resilience, and a lot of people are going to break. Very few people will bend. This is a thing where people are going to have to learn to bend, and those that don't will break, right? But just to wrap this up, this the essential idea is that we don't know how we're going to respond to something until it happens. Like, we don't know what kind of father we're going to be, or mother we're going to be, or husband or wife we're going to be until we get married. Like, there's things that, until you do the job, until you're engaged in the work, until you're, you see this when people go to war, and what the soldiers will do in a depraved, this hellish environment, what people will do in a war. This happens to countries where they just collapse in some way or another. They're invaded or whatever. And what people will do to survive, it's things that are inside of them, programs that are inside of them, the things that some scars that are inside of them that wouldn't come out unless they're in a certain circumstance. They're in a certain situation. And so people don't know. Like, you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. And, sometimes people are in such a daze and are so hypnotized by our current system, have shut down and are, not really awake or alive or aware. But then a big event happens and it sort of jars them awake, right, for some brief period of time where you are now, needing to be alert to survive. You can't be on autopilot, just drifting through life. And like I said, if these things are going to happen soon. If there's, it all is looking like it's trending towards a collapse of some sort or another. I don't know how many more warnings there are going to be, but the warnings have already, started to take place. And so, to give oneself an opportunity to see if they're a part of this solution, right? If they're part of a post-apocalyptic type of solution. And you can do your best to prepare for it. Everybody can. And it's just like anything else. Like, until it happens, nobody really knows how it's going to go for them, right? No one's going to know what's important and, in terms of their preparing for it. And, also just enjoying what we have now, appreciating and being grateful for what we have now, because it's, it's going to get harder and more difficult. But we will be able to connect to God in a way that wasn't possible before. It'll be quieter. There'll be less noise in the environment from electromagnetic pollution and all these things. So there are advantages to it. And for some people, they'll actually like that life better. There's so many people who are miserable now, depressed and dead inside. Like, it really can't get much worse, right? But being overwhelmed and being, in a state of shock and being completely unprepared for something, you're not giving yourself a chance at all. And being mentally prepared, being spiritually prepared, being flexible, being open, and coming to, about it with the idea that this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, we don't know what it is until it plays out. And so giving yourself the opportunity to sort of digest what's going on and, not have to go into panic mode and be out, going full out purge and stuff, that's, essential for everybody to consider, because the warnings are there, right? And those people who are able to hear this, a lot of people this is too overwhelming for them. Like, listening to what I just said is too overwhelming for them. Thinking about all these things that are now done for them that you don't have to think about because the beast takes care of them. Like, where, you have occasionally your toilet breaks and you're like, oh, wow, I got to do something about this, right? But until something like that happens, you just take it for granted. And your food's there, your electricity there, your thermostat's there. Every once in a while something, breaks down and you're like, oh, I don't have heat in the house or whatever. But for the most part, people don't think about these things. Then when you have to think about them, you get overwhelmed by how much work it takes and how much you don't know and how all these things. And so, for some people, this is just too much for them. Just these things that I'm saying. It's freaking you out, right? And so, I can't say what kind of person you are, but if you're freaked out by just the idea of something, then what happens when it really happens, right? And so there has to be an adjustment, and you have to change and adapt enough just to be able to give yourself a chance to, make a, decision based on the circumstances on the ground when all this stuff goes down. Anyways, I think I covered everything I wanted to say here. Of course, I could talk about that more in the future, and there's lots of resources out there. Like one thing is, if you have YouTube Premium, you can download videos and they stay permanently on your device even without the internet. And so if you have some way of charging, there's these boxes you can get, these little power boxes that they have like a small, they're pretty expensive, but they have a small solar panel. And you can charge your phone and other things on them briefly. If you're without power permanently, you still have a way of getting electricity. There's other ways too as well. The different things you can get. Things like a hand cranked radio that, you hand crank it and it's got AM radio and these things in case there's people out there doing shortwave things. If the internet's down, way to get information. There's things out there, products. And there's preppers and people out there that can list all these things and tell you what the best one is and all this other stuff, right? But you can have some of these things with you because, you can't count on the internet being there as a way to, buying books and things that, you can be reading. You won't be able to watch and be a part of the, there's so much time you're spending on your internet. What are you going to do with that? Oh, there's one more thing I needed to say. It's likely that you might go through a detoxification situation if you're on any kind of psychological medications or things like this and, all these types of things. People have medications they need, pharmaceutical medications they need to survive. And so all these things have to be considered for people, medicines and whatever it might be. And then, people are addicted to the internet and, things that you do to spend your time and cope and, whatever it is that you do that isn't going to be there. And be able to fill that time. Again, the cleaning and the meditation is really essential to help people just digest and integrate their new reality. And I can't, say enough about that. But these are things you think about, right? Things, you can list the things that you do every day. And in what system? Is it electricity? Is it, the government? Is it, what company? What's responsible for all the things that you need on a daily basis? Where do you get your water? Where do you get your food? Where do you get, all these things? And so think about these systems that are in place and how you can temporarily do a stopgap to help you, give you the time you need to replace those systems and be able to, live a new life and figure things out, right? And you'll have a lot more time in your hands because you won't have a job and you won't have the internet, you won't have TV, you won't have these things, these distractions. And so you'll have a lot more time and energy than you think, than you realize. But if you have the books, you have the knowledge, you have the information somewhere, you have the things you need, then, you're giving yourself the opportunity to absorb the initial blow, initial shock, and then you have you can make decisions based on, you realize what your new life is going to be like, and you can be like, I'm just not up for it, or, yeah, I feel like I can manage this and do this. And then you can build community in these other stages that come later. Anyways, that's enough for today. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.